Folks, welcome back to another episode of the NYU GPH podcast. Now, when we hear of research, we think of data, numbers. But have you ever heard of the term qualitative research? Today, we're joined by a doctoral student in the social and behavioral sciences here at NYU GPH, whose work bridges anthropology, public health, and community-based research. We have Katie Lynch. Katie has a background in medical anthropology and experience as a qualitative methods specialist. She brings a unique lens to public health, one that centers human stories, local environments, and lived experience. Her dissertation right now is focused on the intersection of climate change and public health, and when she's not doing that, she's also competing in Taekwondo competitions, which we can't wait to hear about. Katie, welcome to the NYU GPH podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'd just love to kick it off with you. I know what led you to pursue a doctorate. We can tell that entire story, but what is it like being in a doctorate program? You're in the final stages of it. I'd love to hear all about that.
Yeah, so right now I'm what we sometimes colloquially term ABD, which is an acronym for all but dissertation. And so I'm at the stage where I've completed my coursework, where I've done my dissertation proposal defense, and I'm now what is considered a PhD candidate. I understand at the time that this airs, I'm going to be very close to actually defending my dissertation, which is an exciting but daunting prospect, right? And so right now I'm at the stage where I am fully what we would call like dissertating. And it's funny how academics turn that into a verb, right?
Dissertating.
Yeah. So I've been doing, data collection, data analysis, data curation, and also for my work, being what we would call in the field, right? So being like out in the community, collecting data, doing ethnographic observations, interviews, fieldwork. And so that's really what my life has been like for this past academic year, in addition to, service for the department, supporting research projects, working as like an adjunct instructor. And so that's kind of the life of a doctoral student at this stage.
There's so much you said over there. I mean, you made it look so easy, all the things you're doing. Yeah. I'm curious to explore this term that you called ethnographic observation.
Absolutely.
What is that?
One of the really great things about public health is that it is inherently interdisciplinary, right? And so many of us have come to public health through a core discipline, right? A lot of us have foundational training in a field like anthropology, sociology, biology, right? Epidemiology, and we're all working together to solve these complex public health questions. So for me, I came into public health by way of the discipline of anthropology, right? Anthropology, very broadly, the study of humans through the lens of culture, right? How culture shapes our attitudes, our beliefs, our social patterning, right? How we view, experience, and move through the world. I am particularly specialized in what we would call medical anthropology. So all of those things I just mentioned through the lens of health, not only how that impacts what we understand health to be, but also how it impacts our health beliefs, right? Our perceptions, our behaviors. And so for me, understanding human behavior is a core aspect of public health, right? It's in the name, it's public. Yeah. We're humans, right? The basic science that's done in a lab is so important, and marrying that with understanding what's happening in communities and populations. We need both of those, right, to solve our health problems. And so one of the core methods of anthropological training is what we call ethnography, right? It's based on being out in what we would call natural settings, right? So not in the lab, but out where people are living, working, playing, thinking, and doing, right? It's being embedded in communities, not only observing what's going on, but what we call participant observation, right? So being out there, taking part in activities, speaking with people, and really laying the groundwork so that when you get to the point of what we would call, quote unquote, formal data collection, right? Our interviews, our surveys, we have enough what we would call contextual knowledge to be able to ask the right questions, right? Just like, to give a more quantitative example, in machine learning, there's that metaphor of garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're training the model on bad data, your model's not useful for you. In our research, it's the same thing, right? I could have a wonderfully designed survey that I think is really great. I took a survey design class. It's so good. If I'm not asking the right questions, that has no value because I'm not going to really get the answers that help me really get at the core of the research question, right? And so when we think about qualitative data, it's so often grounded in long-term community engagements. And part of that touches on what we would call this ethnographic work. So that's a long answer to a quick question. And it's interesting. I think it's a learned skill. So part of it feels like, I'm just talking to people. I'm just being friendly, right? Hanging out. But it's something that you practice and develop over time. And one of the things that I think is nice about GPH is that the social behavioral sciences department is really great in marrying, these social theory and research methods with our more traditional public health methods. And students having the opportunity to cross-train is really great.
This is important, what you said about it being a learned skill. It looks like you're talking, but the way you're talking to people, it depends on high-quality questions. It depends on how you craft these high-quality questions. It actually comes from a deep understanding from what I hear.
Yeah.
And this might be even too basic for you, going back to day one.
Yeah.
What is qualitative and quantitative research? The classics that they even bring up in high school. How do you simplify it for the listeners?
No, I think that is a great question. And that is a question that, students would be asking and learning here in the MPH program. So one of the things that, I first talk about when I'm introducing qualitative research is actually going back to something that you talked about when you introduced me, right? When we think of research, we think of quantitative data, right? Numeric data, data that is coming to us with some sort of structure, right? Either from a survey, clinical data, from a medical record, right? We are going to clean and transform the data to do the analysis we need to do, but they're already coming to us with some external structure imposed on it, right? Qualitative data is a form of data. It's just a different form. So at a data level, when I think of qualitative data, it's unstructured data, right? It's coming to me as the narratives that are elicited from the participants, right? So that data comes in a form of a recording like this, right?
Okay.
A transcript, a participant's writing. I could do a content analysis of posts on social media if I wanted. That's a form of qualitative data because it's coming to me not in terms of structure from categories on a survey, right? So when we think of qualitative data, there's a few criteria that we talk about, right? One, it's unstructured data because we're trying to understand what is happening from the point of view of the participant, right? It's getting at what we would call, I'm going to use a big academic word here, the phenomenology, right? That person's lived experience. It takes place in what we would, as I mentioned, call a natural setting. Psychology is a great example of a field that also studies, human behavior, right? A qualitative study would not take place in a lab, right? It's out in the field. And so all of those things are kind of what encompasses qualitative data, right? And so our methods of eliciting that are a little bit different than our other forms of data collection, right? So we could think about in-depth interviews, which, are actually kind of similar to what we're doing right now, right? Someone's asking questions, someone else is giving long-winded ansers, right?
Everybody, I'm no longer a podcast host. I am an ethnographer.
Yeah,
verified by Katie.
Yeah, exactly. We could do focus groups, right? We have that observational data that's collected maybe even before we do the interview.
Yeah.
We could have participants, keep a diary, right? That's really common. Think of our nutrition researchers here at GPH, right? We could think about, like I said, social media posts. So that's kind of the way we would collect that data. And then our form of data analysis, right, is then for us as the researcher based on not our theoretical framework, right, based on our research question, is then to put on our analytical hat and find patterns. And then it's up to us to impose the structure on that data post hoc.
Based
right?
on what you're curious about.
Based on what you're curious about.
Yeah,
or based on maybe some hypothesis that I have based on a prior
study. What we might need to discover.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then quantitative is obviously the opposite of that. It seems more structured.
I mean, if any of my former students have listened to this podcast, they'll probably be like rolling their eyes right now because they've seen this slide before, right? But one of the things that when we talk about research or knowledge creation, it's on what we would call a continuum, right? So maybe if you were, forced to take a philosophy gen ed class in undergrad, you would have heard the term epistemology, which is ways of knowing. Right? And so we have different ways of constructing, right? How we think about research and how we see the world. On one end, we have what we would call the positivist tradition. I think that one's the most familiar to us because we can think about the scientific method, right? That our goal is to try to understand some sort of truth to the extent to which we could uncover it, right? By continually hypothesis testing, right? And accepting or rejecting our null hypothesis, right? I mean, not all researchers would say that there is an objective truth out there. I'm just saying that's the furthest on one end of a spectrum, right? Fully on the other end, you have folks that are pure constructivist, right? On the most extreme end, you might have some anthropologists, let's say, who say there is no objective reality, right? It's all through our perception. This table's only a table because you and I both agree that that's what this is functioning as. There's no such thing as a table. I think a lot of us exist somewhere along that continuum to how we approach research, and we need both, right? So quantitative methods, right? Thinking about our clinical trials on the positivist end, right?
Positivist.
When we have questions around, well, why are people doing this weird thing that we didn't expect that's contrary to our hypothesis? Or I don't really understand what's happening in this setting. I need to understand from the point of view of the participants and how they are constructing their knowledge. Constructivist, right? Our qualitative questions lean more that way. And so based on our question, we are operating across these spheres of knowledge creation. And so when we think about quantitative research, we have disciplinary standards. We have standards for what makes something valid and what makes something rigorous. We have that in qualitative research too. The method feels squishier because we're asking open-ended questions, right? We want each other to be comfortable with eliciting our narratives. But we are also operating in a framework of validity and rigor. It just looks a little bit different.
That is an excellent way to describe it. And thanks for describing the importance of this job and how it might be taken for granted. That's truly what I'm getting out of this.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, there's this word anthropology, which in our pre-chat before the cameras got rolling, you walked in, I'm like, what on earth is anthropology? I thought this was like some random class I had to take
totally,
for credit.
Right? Yeah.
I would love for you to talk to the people that might be the future anthropologists.
Yeah.
Because you're a representative of someone. What is an anthropologist? Who might be interested in anthropology? What on earth is this world of anthropology?
Totally. Well, first I would say to the PhD level anthropologists who might be listening to this, kudos to you. I am a master's level anthropologist, right? But I would say it is the perfect major concentration for somebody that is intellectually curious about the world, right? I started majoring in anthropology because I came in as a history major. I actually originally my intent in undergrad was like, I'm going to go to law school. And then I minored in biology just because I missed taking science classes. And so many of my gen eds were mapping onto that anyway. With history and biology, right? Anthropology, kind of a natural intersection of that. And so I kind of found that field through, my undergraduate experience. Anthropology, there's a lot of different dimensions of it. You could work as an archaeologist. I actually did that for a few summers, some contract work, and it was a really amazing experience. You could work more as a cultural anthropologist, right? Those are touching on those ethnographic methods that I've been speaking about. You could work as a biological anthropologist, right? This is an outdated reference now and is showing my age, right? But think about 15 years ago, that TV show Bones, right? That's a lot of like the forensic anthropologists. So there's a lot of different things you can do with anthropology. Because I'm really interested in people, right? I chose to go the cultural anthropology route.
Ah.
And so I found public health through that. But with that, anthropologists, they go to law school, they go to medical school, they go into research and practice and teaching. I have a good friend who's an anthropologist who works as a user experience designer. I have another really good friend who's an anthropologist, and now she works as a labor organizer, right? And so you could do a lot with this degree. And I think it also speaks to, again, the importance of having strong disciplinary training as you're pursuing research or pursuing an interest or a passion. And I think that is one of the really beautiful things about public health. If I could circle back to that, is, my dissertation committee, right, is comprised of individuals who have a doctoral degree in sociology, advanced training in epidemiology, degree in political science and systems thinking, right? And then here I am with a master's degree in anthropology, doing a public health degree. And so we're all in the School of Public Health. And it's really great because I could look to my mentors and see their career path, how they found public health via the social sciences, right? And it's a really wonderful thing, and I think it deepens your research. I think it makes it more intentional, and I think it also makes it stronger, right? If you really understand why you're asking the questions that you're asking.
If I understand correctly, for the listeners, an anthropologist is someone that is very deeply curious about and understanding the non-positive, the one you were talking about, those questions in any field specifically. So you are cultural. Then you said there's the biological one. So it's about going all in to understand and fall in love with these problems, if you will.
Yeah, if you keep asking why might this be the case, you might be an anthropologist. I don't know.
Yeah, what it really is like we're all technically anthropologists of some kind in that way.
Yeah.
But you all are asking much deeper questions and going into it is actually the task of being an anthropologist, and it doesn't feel high level. It's very intentional.
Exactly. Yeah. The literal definition, right? If we're going to go back to the Latin root, it's the study of humans.
There's so much you have done, and I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah.
What is your dissertation about? Tell us about your dissertation. Where is it taking you?
Yeah. So as we talked about during the introduction, my research really sits at the intersection of climate change and its impact on public health. So throughout my doctoral studies here at NYU, I've worked as a graduate researcher in the Center for Public Health Disaster Science, right, which is a really amazing center here at GPH. And I also work with Dr. Alexis Mergenoff in the Climate Justice and Health Lab, right? So thinking about how climate change-driven extreme weather events intersect with the social vulnerabilities, right, that are in our society. Often this is a phrase that we hear a lot in climate change research. I'm going to say it again in case folks haven't heard it. Often the communities on the front lines of climate change, right, that are experiencing the worst of the exposures and impact right now are the ones that are the least responsible for it, right? The big corporate polluters, right, are not the ones whose communities are being flooded, right, or burning down. It's you and me. It's workers. And so really thinking about climate change is a social justice issue as well as a public health issue. And so for my research, for my dissertation specifically, right, because there's a lot of dimensions through which you can approach the question of climate change, and there's a lot of great work being done at GPH around this question. I'm really interested in thinking about long-term exposures to climate change and how that affects you across the life course, right? The life course thinking about our different stages of life, right? From childhood through older adulthood. More and more we're seeing it's not just one big event. I think a lot of the really deep, rich work around climate justice emerged after Katrina. Think of the scale of that disaster. Think of the population that it impacted. Think of all the socio-political aftermath of that event.
So just hold that thought, the event Katrina, for people that might not have heard about it or that were not exposed to it or are from a different country as well. What was that event? What was the gravity of that event?
It was a Category 5 hurricane that hit New Orleans in late August 2005. We're coming up on
The 20
It's
year.
the 20th anniversary of it at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was already research being done on like disaster through a public health and social justice lens. After that, it really expanded the field, right? In the ways we should be thinking about these questions. Now, when we're thinking about disasters, right, we have hurricanes. In the United States, we also have tornadoes, right? Worldwide, monsoons, earthquakes, mudslides. What's the one I haven't mentioned yet? Wildfires, right? I think,
Wow.
I don't need to remind our listeners about the devastation of wildfires, particularly what we saw in LA in January, right? So often when we think about public health and disasters, particularly disasters driven by what we call anthropogenic climate change. Again, right, thinking about human, right? Human-driven climate
Wow.
change. Previous studies, right? A lot has focused on a single, what we call exposure event, right? A massive disruptive disaster, right? Thinking about Katrina in 2005, right? Thinking about Hurricane Sandy in New York City. And what we have learned in the field about trajectories of recovery, right? Thinking about trajectories of post-traumatic stress and mental health, right? Thinking about how social networks change, how access to healthcare changes, right? That's so important. What's missing? Increasingly, in the United States and worldwide, we're not just experiencing one event, right? It's multiple. And so when we're thinking about how do children recover after disaster, how do young adults make choices about their life, think about where they want to live, how do older adults think about when they're going to retire? Are they going to age in place? Are they able to retire? How are young people thinking about starting a family, right, in the context of this warming world? Often now what we're seeing is a cohort, a generation that has grown up, not just experiencing one disaster, but multiple. So the lens through which I'm looking at this for my dissertation is wildfire, particularly wildfire smoke exposure, right? Wildfire smoke exposure is really interesting, right? Because it's both what we would call acute, right? Something that happens in a defined period. So think about, I'm not sure if you or any of our listeners were in New York City 2 summers ago in 2023 when we had that day where the sky turned orange, right? It was really horrifying. It felt like the end of the world. Is what we would call an acute period, right? It was a few days, it was a week. Wildfire smoke, though, is also chronic, right? So imagine experiencing that day of orange sky, not just once, right? Like us New Yorkers, multiple times a season across multiple years. Wildfire smoke also accumulates. So a lot of, emerging epidemiological work is starting to be done and needs to be done of understanding the long-term impacts of that exposure, right? There's also behavioral questions, right? What does that mean from a mental health perspective in that environment? Is it normalizing? Where you're like, oh, well, this is something that happens to me now. If it's normalizing, though, how does that change your behavior? Think about COVID, right? We were masking a lot. And then as we got more used to it, do I really need to wear the mask on the subway? I don't know, right? Or is it sensitizing, right? Is every time the sky turns orange, is it going to trigger acute mental health symptoms? Might be a mixture of both. How does that manifest differently across generations, right? Thinking about adults who are a little bit older than we are, right? Who didn't grow up in this environment and have seen this shift over their lifetime. Or young people, folks around our age, right? And I assume we're close to the same age, a little older, I don't know, right? Where this is the world that we've aged into, right? It's the only one we've known. And so my dissertation is using multiple methods, right? It's using spatial analysis to map both the chronic and the acute exposures over time in California. Right? It's using quantitative methods, right? It's using an approach that I call difference in differences to look at mental health impacts in high and low exposure counties and how that might change when an event happens, right? To get at that sensitization question. And then the bulk of it is using these ethnographic and qualitative methods, doing in-depth interviews with families who live in what we would call a high exposure county. So specifically, I'm doing interviews in Sonoma County and Butte County, which is a rural county in Northern California where the Camp Fire was in 2018. And for those who don't know, that's the town of Paradise, where that town burned down. And they've been also subject to successive wildfires and smoke for the last few years. Sonoma, geographically, where it sits, it's a little closer to the coast. So they have had devastating wildfires 2017, 2018, 2019. But because of where they sit geographically, they also get a lot of smoke. And it's one of the highest smoke exposure counties. Right? Socio-demographically, like the makeup of the community, these two communities are also very different. Right? The way the response and the recovery and the risk perception might be different, right? And so that's why I picked these two as kind of comparison is the wrong word, but two case studies, right? For understanding what we would call a cumulative climate exposure across the life course through the lens of wildfire. So, by the time this recording comes out, I will have, collected my data, completed my analyses. So I'll probably be listening back to this and laughing and say like, oh, Katie, you had some hypotheses and then you've learned so many other things from your data.
And you're going to put it in the comment section below of what you learned.
Exactly. And so that's, what I've been doing. I was fortunate enough to receive a research award to fund this work through the Natural Hazard Center, which is, operated out of Boulder, Colorado. They have a climate change and health outcomes research call, right? And this is an amazing initiative. It's an award that's funded through the National Science Foundation, and it's for researchers. And they like to focus on early career researchers, which is a wonderful opportunity for me as well as other doctoral students, right? To apply for projects that look at the intersection of climate change, social vulnerability, and health. So the timing was good because when the funding call came out, I had just defended my dissertation proposal. So my committee was like, hey, you wrote this already. You should apply. And so I was awarded funding to do this research, which means, one, I can go in person to California, right? To be what we would call, again, in the field, right? Talking to people in person, visiting organizations, being there when a smoke event happens. And also it gives me funding to then compensate the participants I talk to, which is a really big part of research ethics, right? If folks are giving you their time, their attention, they're sharing personal and emotional sometimes experiences with you, it is not only your job as a researcher, one, to, compensate them for their time if you're able, but also to be responsible with that data and then honor that, right? And so over the past year, I've made a couple trips out to Northern California for my field work, as well as doing, data analysis here at GPH and working with some national public health data sets that have helped support this work as well.
I can feel the passion. I bet the listeners can feel the passion through you right now. There's such clarity in what you're saying. There's such immense direction. I would love for you to leave the future of anthropology or the anthropologists that are listening, or even people. I think everyone can ask better questions in life.
Yeah.
And it shows me that you have discovered these through people's authentic voices. What is your process to help people come out with their authentic voice, and how do you ask high quality questions? What is a nutshell you could probably leave everyone with?
Yeah. As a master's level anthropologist and PhD candidate in social behavioral sciences, really thinking of myself as like a mixed methods public health scientist, hopefully, when I graduate, right, is how I would position myself, asking the right question is really important. And so one is, again, we're not so different, you and I, when you're doing a podcast, right? Thinking about what it takes to make someone feel comfortable, right? Build rapport, chatting a bit before the formal data collection happens, right?
We're in data collection process right now.
Exactly. Making sure that the questions are truly open-ended. One of the things that is really difficult, and you've probably experienced this yourself, is asking a question that can't be answered with a yes or a no, right? It's really hard to construct a question that isn't binary. It's hard to construct a question that isn't biased in one direction, prompting a more negative response towards something or a more positive response towards something. That's hard. It's hard to be that empathic neutral sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I think particularly in public health, where we're talking about topics where maybe there's something that is part of our core beliefs, but someone in front of me, right, is denying climate change, right? It's not my position to judge that during the interview. In fact, I want to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But that's not the facts. That's not the science. But I'm going to take it in, right? And this applies to other topics as well. Typically, when we construct an interview, you would take what you call the funnel approach, right? Like think of a funnel, like an upside down triangle. Similar to what we've done today, right? We're starting very broad. What is your experience like at GPH? Then digging down into the specifics over time, right? So, I really appreciate it because it gave me a second to collect my thoughts that the first question wasn't, tell me about your dissertation, right? Every doctoral student's worst nightmare. I don't know, right? But
I'm officially an anthropologist.
Yeah, exactly. It gave me time to think, to settle, to process before I was like, what do I actually want to say with the 5 minutes I have to say it, right? Similarly, you're starting broad and then you're digging down into the meat, into the nuggets, right? One of the great things about interviewing about this approach is that by the time you get to the end, the person in front of you has been primed to think about that topic for the last 30 minutes, for the last hour. So often the richer data is going to come at the end. I'm sure when you're editing me down, you're going to cut stuff in the beginning to be like, that's not useful. Maybe something I say in 10 minutes will be much more insightful. Who knows, right?
Maybe we wouldn't have to edit a single thing.
Yeah, who knows? Let's see. And so that's like a typical approach we would take when doing a formal data collection interview. But like you said, it takes practice. It takes time. Some interviews are going to be better than others. So that's what I always tell students as well, is if you have an interview with someone who's just kind of stonewalling, maybe they're a little bit quieter, maybe it just, for whatever reason, it doesn't go well, that's okay. You'll get the next one, right? Yeah. Not every interview is going to be perfect.
No rep is a bad rep, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. It's part of the process. With your interview guide, once you have the questions you want to ask, you can, what we would call, pilot it. So you would do a practice run, basically. You could either practice doing the interview with a sympathetic friend, right, or another student in your lab or research group. You could maybe do some initial interviews with close collaborators or contacts at a study site you're working with, right? Saying like, hey, like, we're going to go through these questions. I'd love to get your feedback on them. See what's working, see what's not. Take it in, make the edits, tweak it. You'll usually know right away if a question's not working, right? Yeah, absolutely. So cut the question.
But it's important. It's crucial for people to go through that question to discover that.
Exactly.
Wow.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so by the time, I'm done piloting, I have an interview guide that I feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable with having broad questions that I could use as a launching off point, right? To ask what we would call those probing or follow-up questions. I'm sure there's questions that you've asked me today that maybe aren't written on your laptop, but have come out through the course of our conversation.
All of them.
Yeah, same thing. I tell my students, I'm like, look, like, it's all improv, baby, right? You got to yes and what's happening. Researchers being able to have strong scientific communication in a way that's accessible, in a way that makes people comfortable, in a way that you could build off of the ideas of the person in front of you, that makes your research stronger and makes your science stronger. And I think these are really transferable skills. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That I would say it's a blueprint for anyone to get started in asking better questions, get down that process. It's such an essential life skill, whether you're as an ethnographer, an anthropologist. There's so many use cases for asking high quality questions. I want to go back up the funnel.
Absolutely, yeah.
As we ask I have these last few questions for you. I have to know about, I see this passion, intensity, and focus in you when I speak to you.
Yeah.
You have been doing Taekwondo for a long time.
Yeah.
Does anything come from that it's an interest, it's a hobby on the side that you have? What have you gained from Taekwondo in your life as an anthropologist?
Oh, that's a great question. I really love that. I started Taekwondo when I was 6 years old. Basically, I was like, this looks like a fun thing to do. And, you could kick, you could scream. As like a 6-year-old, yes, please. But it's something that I have stuck with, returned to throughout my life, right? So in college and during my master's degree, I competed in the collegiate league, the Eastern Collegiate Taekwondo Conference. We would go to the National Collegiate Taekwondo Association, national tournament. And it was just nice. It creates camaraderie, right? It's, like any sport, it creates balance in your life. Now, during COVID, the Taekwondo school that I train at here in New York City, Westside Taekwondo, it's up in Morningside by our friends up at Columbia. They, during the pandemic, everyone had to go virtual, right? So did we. And so they asked me if I could teach a children's class over Zoom. And I was like, how am I going to do this? Right? How am I? And the parents were like, my child is going crazy. So let's give them some structure for their punching, their kicking. And so me, as well as the other coaches, we built a curriculum. It helped create continuity throughout the social distancing phase of the pandemic. And then when we returned to in-person, I transitioned into being a full coach there. So I teach a weekly adult all levels class. We focus a lot on, cardio, sparring, techniques, a lot of sparring. We suit up a lot and we play, and it's really fun. I love it. I think it gives you, there's so many things in our lives that are competing for our attention. School, work, the world, right? And everyone has their own form of stress relief, right? Something that I've always really appreciated about, martial arts, whether it is boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, judo, MMA, whatever you're into, you can't focus on anything else when you're in the ring.
Yeah.
Right? You're in there. It's you. It's the person in front of you. Right? And it's your coach's voice. But you can't be thinking about the paper you have to write, reviewer comments, exam, right? Emails. Why? Because you're going to get kicked in the face. Right? You have to be present and you have to focus. You asked me, and I got a little off topic, but you asked me the ways in which those skills are transferable. When you're in the ring, right, with what one might call a combat sport, you have to read the other person. You have to understand their body language, their tells. Are they going to move this way? Oh, they're on the defense. I have them on the back heel. Oh, they're aggressive. They are trying to hold the center. Yeah. You have to be attuned to what your sparring partner, your opponent, what they're doing. When we're in these moments, right? When we're in an interview, which is also a dyad, right? 2 people. We're reading each other right now, right? You're like, oh, this question's working really well. This person's a little hesitant to answer this question. I have to follow up with what they're doing. Oh, they're pulling back. Oh, I could see it in their eyes that they're losing interest, and I'm going to have to let them know we're almost done. That similar reading of another person, that's happening. It's just in a different way, right? One's maybe more emotional and one's maybe more physical. It does sound weird to compare an interview to sparring because I don't want this to be a combative experience, but it is a collaborative experience, right? And so that's something that over time I think I've come to notice the similarities and why I really like it.
How counterintuitive. You're so right. That it is combative, but it's rather collaborative in the combat.
Exactly.
Because your combat won't happen without each other anyways.
You know, like I always say to students when we start, like we're in the ring, right? There are rules of engagement, right? It's not a bar fight. It's not a street fight. If you get into that situation, leave, right? Keep yourself safe. When we're in here, we are in the parameters of the setting, right? And so there is that collaboration that is taking place. I think it also gives you confidence, right? You know, I'm not as intimidated about doing a public speaking thing because no one's trying to kick me in the head while I'm doing it, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. We'll see what happens. We'll see how this goes. And then also knowing how to, I mean, this is really lame, but like quite literally roll with the punches, right? I think when a lot of folks start Taekwondo, they're really scared to get hit, right? The goal when you're in the ring is not to get hit, but if you take the hit, it's not the end of the world and you should be able to do it, right? And so typically when we, start training, one of the things we practice is we practice getting hit, right? If your partner in a controlled environment is kicking you and you understand how to take it and then breathe through it, it's not going to happen to you for the first time in the ring. It's not going to be the end of the world. You're not scared of it. You know it's going to happen. It's all about the practice. It's all about knowing how to take the hits with the goal of avoiding them in the future. I would say there's similar things with navigating grad school or research in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Practice. Rejections will happen. You're going to take some hits. It's not the end of the world. Move through it. Find the new opening, right?
Love that. I mean, I'm glad that it serves you in that way and you can have so many transferable skills for something you've been doing since the age of 6. Final question, Katie. The future of public health, what excites you about it? Where does your optimism come from when it comes to the future of public health?
I think right now we are in a state of uncertainty, right? The world, the bureaucracy, the infrastructure, it might look really different at the time that this recording is released from the time that I'm talking to you right now. And so how can we have continuity in a system of flux and uncertainty? One of the things that I think we should keep doing as public health, and what really excites me, is seeing folks double down on their commitment to public health advocacy. I've had the wonderful opportunity as a doctoral student to both be a student as well as a mentor, right? Working with master students in the lab, right? Working as a teaching assistant or as an adjunct instructor. And something that makes me really excited is seeing that despite uncertainty, despite disruptions and change, right? Even within the context of my own research, I haven't seen, the students shy away from thinking about these topics, right? From thinking about topics of reproductive justice, from thinking and talking about access to gender affirming care, for thinking about how climate change is a health equity issue. All of these things are so important to public health, right? For thinking about anti-racism, right? And how racism is also a public health issue. These are topics that, regardless of whether or not there is external support for them, these are things that as students, we keep advocating for, right? And as our generation graduates, we're going to have a larger voice, the advocates. And so when I'm looking at, all of you at GPH, and all the great work that we're doing, I really see that spark, I see that passion, and I see that commitment. And so that's something that kind of, despite everything, does make me feel optimistic for the future. So I really appreciate your question.
And with that, I think that's a great place to end this. And I'm glad that people doubling down is where your optimism comes from, because I can feel the passion, and I feel like you've already tripled down and there's even more to go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on the episode, Katie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. That's Katie Lynch, everyone. Everything in the description. Whatever you hear, you might see Katie in the comments updating with some information. Check out Katie Lynch everywhere, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Thank you.